Hey there, Module 2 is about borrowing. If you have not picked up a set of packets, little booklets, you really need to come by and do so. It is really showing on the last test that some of you haven't looked at the booklet. There is an online copy also, but be nice to have it in your hand, then you can use it as a resource during the test. So we're going to look at borrowing in different ways and using credits. Using credit, that doesn't necessarily mean a credit card, but it could be a credit card. And we're going to look at some reasons why people use credit. So you might want to think, like, is it good or bad to borrow money? When is it okay? And when is it not a good idea? So there are some things when it is essential, right? Most people would never be able to own a home if they didn't borrow money. So some of those big purchases that we have to have the expense anyway, right? If you buy a home and you have a mortgage, that's considered credit because someone else is allowing you to use their money. And you would have to be paying rent, so you're paying that. So a car, sometimes a car, that's another time that student loan, when we know we're making an investment for future income. But student loans, be careful because you don't want to just be borrowing way more than is necessary because it does have to be paid back. When is it not a good idea? Probably when it's just because you just can't wait to have something that is only a want and not a need. So on the Jamboard today, there's a place for you to check in. There's also a page that gives, I think there are 6 scenarios. They came out of the book, so you can also find them in the book. And then whether you think each of those would be a good or a bad use of credit. And you might have like a disclaimer, good if, or bad if. So it might depend, but I think that there are some of those that would definitely maybe fall in better in one category than the other. So why do you think people borrow money, right? So again, those big purchases, that is one time. That's a positive time, right? That's an acceptable time. But that wanting instant gratification, becoming overextended once they start borrowing, then they just have to keep borrowing because they're paying off last time. So that's another time. Sometimes it's emergency situations. So there are many times you're going to see in your assignment page like a whole list of categories of times. And then think about, how does borrowing impact your spending power? So if I can borrow, like using a credit card is really a way of borrowing. If I can borrow, I can spend more now. However, because I'll have to pay that back later, it might mean I can spend less in the future. So at some point that can kind of tip on us and actually reduce spending power. So we're going to talk about Mariah and Jesse, and they're both thinking about doing some borrowing in one way or the other. Mariah's a junior who lives at home. She has a part-time job. She's been pretty responsible. She's saving for college. She wants to have her own credit card. Her mom's not so thrilled about that idea. If you read in the book, you'll see that her mom shares that she got into a lot of kind of trouble with credit cards, got in over her head, and she doesn't want Mariah to make those same mistakes. Mariah wants to try to build some credit. So it seems like she's doing it for the right reason, so that when she needs a car or a house, she'll already have some credit built. Jesse, on the other hand, is a sophomore, doesn't have a job yet, but he's saving to buy a truck, when he gets his license. He's already saved, if I recall correctly, it's in your book, $2,500. But right now he doesn't have a job yet. So credit is basically that you buy something now and you pay for it later. Again, the reason for that could come up in all sorts of ways. But whether it's that you use your utilities and then you pay for them after the fact. Cell phones, except unless you do like a pay-as-you-go where you pay up front, you use it now, you pay for it later. So our utilities, using a credit card, buying our house, buying a car, so installment loans, mortgages, those are all considered credit of some sort. It's not that credit itself is good or bad. It's pretty necessary in our society. It's how we use it. So in the community, as I mentioned before, spending power, so it increases. So if we start with consumers there, if they have credit, then they can spend more money. As they spend more money, the demand for the products and the services rise because they're out there spending the money. Then companies are going to spend more. They're going to hire more people. Those people are earning money. They spend more money, and the cycle continues. But if too much of that is based on borrowing, then we get into some trouble if people cannot be repaying what they've borrowed. That can affect those companies, not just banks, but also individual companies where maybe they've taken out like credit cards, or they hired someone to fix their roof, but they didn't have the money to pay it yet, all sorts of things. So different types of credit, and you'll see that some of these are very much things I've already mentioned a little bit. A revolving credit, that's like your credit cards. So you use multiple purchases, you just have a certain limit. You can repay what's owed each month. If you repay it all, there's typically not a charge unless you've done cash advance. Installment credit would be more like your car loan. You borrow a certain amount, and then it's set, divided up payments like you repay over a set time. You might repay it early, but it's set for a set time. Cash loans, again, you're borrowing a certain amount, and you might say you're going to repay it by a certain time. This would be cash loan, just like from a friend, maybe from a payday place. Please don't confess that you're doing that, because there's got to be better ways. I hope you have better resources. And then service credit, that's like I mentioned, your utility bills, where you use it and then you're paying for it after the fact. So Jesse right now doesn't have a loan, and this is his monthly plan. Now, he doesn't have a job, so apparently he gets $250 a month in allowance. Wow, Jesse's pretty lucky. But if he had a loan payment, if he borrows money for a truck, he's considering that, getting a cosigner to borrow money for a truck. If he has a $200 loan payment and he still is only going to spend $250 a month, he's not going to have much left for clothes, entertainment, or food. So something's going to have to give. So that's sure, he's ramping up the economy by buying that truck. And you all know, his truck insurance and gas. So the truck's going to be about all he can afford. Probably going to need to have an actual job. So trying to decide, have something now or something later. Instant gratification is an unwillingness to give up something now in return for something later. You just want it when you want it. You want it right now. So you're going to use that credit card. You're going to go ahead and buy a car without having very much money down. Maybe that person's only worried about, well, the payment's only this much, and not thinking about how long they're going to pay or how much interest they're going to pay. Delayed gratification is that willingness to give up something now in return for something later. So in other words, like saving the money. Saying no to some small things now so that you can get the something later. So this is familiar. We talked about this before, but especially important with credit. Asking, do we need it or do we just want it? If I don't need it, why exactly do I want it? Will I actually use it? Could I find it for less? And then what will I have to give up or put off by using credit to buy this now? So it might not seem like you're giving up anything at the time, but later, when that bill comes, at some point, you gotta pay, all right? I found out that the hard way when I was in college. We're not going to role play about Mariah. So you have a borrowing fitness test in your activities today where you're just going to be saying yes or no to things. And then you have a reflection page where you're saying like, how do you think you rate? And what changes might you make for improvement? And then you also have a page where you're answering questions about Mariah, Jessie, and yourself about what are the reasons that apply to each of those people, those 3 columns, about why you use credit. Because Jessie's thinking about a loan. Let me switch over so you can see what that assignment's going to look like. Okay, so I do expect that you put things on the Jamboard today. Put your initials so that I know whose are whose. And then the other things are all in this one file. There are 4 pages. You should be doing something on every one of those 4 pages. So the first page, put your name. I'm not particularly concerned about whether or not you include the date. And then when you're editing this, you will not be able to type in that little box. Just mark an X next to the box for the ones that you would say yes to. And then at the bottom, it tells you kind of how you scored, so to speak. So the more yes answers on the odd numbers and the no answers on the even numbers, but you're really not supposed to know that before you answer. And then you're going to reflect. So you should have things marked at the top. Probably everybody's going to mark something. And then which area would you say is your weakest? What are 2 things you can do to strengthen your ability? All right, so the second part, talking about Mariah and Jessie. And again, this is in your book also to have more information about it. So you might get some more info from the book than just what's on this paper. Why do you think she's getting a credit card? What do you think is Jessie's reason for using a loan to buy a truck? And then what would prompt you to borrow money from friends or family? Or in our case, since we're older, maybe use a credit card. And then on the next page, you're going to mark reasons that apply to each of you. So I use my credit card for convenience. I also pay it off every month, but I would say convenience. Do you use it for instant gratification, for the protection, because they offer some protection? Lots more information in your booklet than I covered in this less than 15 minutes. Right? So that's the last thing. You'll be marking things here. And then, if possible, please try to use this turn-in button. Makes it lots easier. If not turn in, please share your things with me. I spent a lot of time trying to find. Okay, so have a great week. Thanks.